Dr. Ardeshir Faghri is a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Delaware, the former director of the Delaware Center for Transportation Research, and an associate director at the Smarter Center. His areas of expertise include transportation systems engineering, global positioning, and geographical information systems, soft computing, and applied probability theory. He has led numerous multimodal transportation planning, design, operations, and maintenance projects nationally and internationally. In the US, he has garnered over $30 million in research grants from the National Science Foundation, Federal Highway Association, and state departments of transportation in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Internationally, he has conducted projects for the United Nations Development Program and has served as a member of the European Symposium on Artificial Intelligence Applications in Transportation. Thanks so much for being here, Artie. I appreciate you having a conversation with me today.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I appreciate you inviting me. And I also want to thank you for all your efforts and your contributions to the Smarter Center, your organization, and all your other good work that you've done for the center. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Well, given that you have such a broad range of experience in transportation and engineering to draw from in this conversation, I wanted to kind of take us through a whirlwind of this very broad subfield of transportation systems and how they relate to urbanization. So to guide us through that conversation, I kind of want to start by just kind of establishing some of the basic patterns of American urbanization with you. So can you begin by simply painting a picture of urbanization trends in the United States over the past several decades and the kind of sociological and geographic patterns that have been most significant for the development of the country's transportation systems?
Absolutely. Joe, there's a famous phrase that says, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you'll go. So I need to tell you a little about the history of urbanization. Urbanization, really very simply put, is movement and migration of population and a demographic shift from rural areas, more agriculture, more agrarian areas, to more industrialized, larger populations and larger population densities of urban areas. Now, both these terms, urban and rural, do have specific and numerical definitions. In the United States, the US Census Bureau defines the term. It has changed over time, but for all practical applications, when we have a minimum density of about 1,000 people per square mile, a population of 5,000 people, or at least 2,000 housing units, we refer to that as an urban area. And then we get into areas with populations between 5,000 to 50,000. And sometimes we refer to them as metropolitan areas. And then more than 50,000 are larger metropolitan areas. So they can be quantified. Different countries quantify them differently. Even within the United States, different organizations define them differently. But really, the history of urbanization in the United States goes back to the 1830s and the Industrial Revolution that made cities more industrial factories and made people leave their more agricultural lifestyle to a more industrial lifestyle inside cities and metropolitan areas. However, in the United States, we need to remind ourselves that after World War II, we had what's referred to as the suburbanization phenomena. And the suburbanization phenomena took place because several factors. Because first of all, we had the GIE Bill loans. It was a government-backed loans made home ownership more accessible to returning veterans. Uh, Demand for suburban homes, family-focused housing, good economies, cheaper gas, and of course, our interstate highway system. So you combine all that, it was very attractive for a lot of people to move with their nuclear families away from central urban districts to the suburbs. And commuting times of 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, even up to an hour was no problem. So the suburbanization phenomena, really, that was right after World War II because of these factors that I mentioned. So the recent urbanization, people moving back to central core of urban areas and metropolitan areas, a lot of planners refer to this as the re-urbanization in the United States. Now, I keep saying in the United States because this whole urbanization phenomena is happening in all of the industrial world and the Western countries and countries with good economies. Again, people leaving rural, lower density population areas to go to more urban, higher density, and higher population areas. Now, according to, in the United States, US Census Bureau, the United States population in 2024, over 85% of the population lives in the urban areas and 15% live in rural areas. Now, in the last, I'd say since the computer information technology and latest AI technology, again, that has been one of the most influential factors for people moving to more urban areas. Again, because of jobs, because of better economic opportunities, and better amenities. So that's basically has been one of the root causes of more people moving to urban areas. In terms of the demographics of really in the United States, who is moving more to the urban areas, at least in the United States, and my guess is in a lot of the Western countries and European countries, the younger people, the younger generation, are the ones that are the driving force for this urbanization. And again, because of job opportunities, because of amenities and lifestyle, cities now are offering high density restaurants, nightlife, gyms, and of course, higher education opportunities. I mean, in our really neighborhood, universities like Johns Hopkins University, they've opened campuses in Washington, D.C. Virginia Tech has campuses in Washington, D.C. University of Virginia has campus in Washington, D.C. Boston University. So higher education, amenities, jobs, and just a more exciting lifestyle. Now, for the older population, many of them, they prefer the suburban and rural areas, mostly because of lower cost, the concept of aging in place. A lot of seniors often stay in their existing homes or communities as they age, leading to an increased rural and urban rural population and suburban population, and more desire for space. So some older adults and even uh, you know, even midlife, they prefer suburban or rural areas for their open spaces and natural beauty. But high tech, economic opportunities, and amenities really has convinced a lot of young people in the United States to move now back to the urban areas. Now, in Western Europe and many of the countries with strong economies, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, we've noticed from time to time, you see advertisements in magazines and newspapers for homes in Italy, for instance, selling for €1. And that's because a lot of the young people in those villages and small towns in rural areas, they've left. They've gone to the larger urban areas, and the economy of these rural areas has basically collapsed. So the mayors and town folks come up with these plans to revitalize. But urbanization is a phenomenon that's taking place in a large part of the industrial world right now.
Wonderful. And Dr. Faghri, I want to explore what these development patterns have meant for the transportation systems in these urban areas by further situating them in space and time, as we've sort of begun doing. And to do so, I want to explore this idea of like the bones of a city, meaning, so you discussed how urbanization, as we understand it today, was a function of the Industrial Revolution. Many of America's cities in the Northeast were, of course, established prior to the Industrial Revolution. And because of that, they had much more walkable urban centers because there was really no other alternative for mobility at the time. I mean, you had like the horse-drawn carriage and so forth when it comes to moving goods, but fundamentally, they had urban cores resembling that of, well, most cities in human history. Now, contrast that with the urban cores of cities in the American sunbelt. Think Dallas, Atlanta, Phoenix, because they didn't have those technological constraints and emerged as urban centers after the introduction of the car. They don't have that kind of walkable core. Does that mean that they have kind of missed the boat, so to speak, when it comes to the development of transportation services like passenger transit in those areas? You know, had they been kind of locked out?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Joe. We see that, well, a good formula and a rule of thumb is that public transit of any form succeeds in high density urban area. So density is an important factor that makes or breaks a public transportation system. We see in cities like Philadelphia and New York, although they are not considered cost effective for the agencies and governments, but we see that they have survived. In fact, in New York, compared to other public transit agencies, they are doing a lot better. Unfortunately, the SEPTA, Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority in Philadelphia and surrounding regions, is not doing well. In the United States, most, if not all, transit agencies are subsidized by the government and at different government levels. So one of the major problems with transit systems in the United States, and especially the ones that you just referred to, traditionally being successful, is that the COVID relief fund that was given to these transit agencies is no longer there. I watch my local news on a daily basis, and I live close to Philadelphia. And SEPTA has had extremely poor financial problems. In fact, this past couple of weeks, they've had to cancel some of their routes. They've had to freeze hiring. They've had to freeze salaries. And so they have faced significant challenges. Now, the public transit system in Philadelphia and New York, are they going to stay? Yes, they are going to stay, but they need intelligent planning. They need a lot of subsidies, and they will move forward. Now, you mentioned the sunbelt. The sunbelt, first and foremost, Dallas, Phoenix, or Atlanta, what they don't have is population density. Population density is extremely important for success of any public transportation system. So they don't have the population density. And the other thing that comes into this equation, and that's true with almost anything that we do with transportation, is the I love my car culture in the United States. The culture of loving my car and loving my freedom. And when you combine those two, the equation doesn't support public transportation very well. Now, have they missed the boat completely on public transit and active transportation? Not exactly. Not exactly. Cities like Dallas, DART, Dallas area rapid transit. Well, they have the longest light rail system with lowest ridership, but it's there. It's there. And Atlanta, Atlanta, MARTA is the name of their public transit agency. Again, the same problems. Sometimes unique issues, like for instance, for Atlanta, there was political disagreements between folks in urban areas in Atlanta and suburbs, and suburban folks would not allow the public transportation to reach that destination, the suburban destinations. So it caused some political issues, and it hasn't been successful. But it's there. It's there. And the same with Atlanta, the same with Phoenix. Phoenix, Arizona, they suffered, and I think to this day, still, I was in Phoenix, was last year, I think, from low density population. And even though they do have a light rail system, they basically had to build everything from scratch. And it started operating in 2008 because no matter how low density or how unlikely a public transit system is to succeed, you still need to serve a population that's dependent on public transportation. And there's nothing you could do for that. And a lot of subsidies goes to these public transportation systems. And other cities like Houston, for instance, they've started looking into different modes of public transportation systems, buses, the paratransit is very strong. So a combination, now a lot of these cities are looking into the correlation between land use and public transit. It's called transit-oriented developments, this correlation between land use and public transit. So again, they haven't missed the boat completely, but the auto-centered culture plus low density in their urban areas, it doesn't really make them good candidates for public transportation.
When you talk about auto-centric culture, I can't help but think about the way that automobiles were imagined in the immediate post-war era. And by that, I mean, um, they were kind of a paragon of futurism at the time, and they were seen as the future compared to the kind of antiquated mode of mobility offered by, say, the streetcar. And now it almost seems like that trend has reversed yet again. I went to Tokyo for a few weeks earlier this year, and when I show my American friends images of the photos I brought back or photos of, say, like high speed rail from China, that is what seems futuristic. It seems kind of cyberpunk in a way. You know, it reminds people of Blade Runner. And so at the same time, I can hold this idea in my head of like, okay, this rail system, whether it be in China or in Japan, is a very futuristic idea. At the same time, it comes from a very different historical development paradigm. If you were to take Tokyo, for instance, Tokyo was flattened in 1945, and they had the opportunity to kind of rebuild their urban core from scratch with a lot of American money, mind you. And so I guess with that lead up, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, um, what are the valuable lessons that we can take from international examples? And what are the things that are kind of built in to the American system's constraints? You know, what can we take from Western Europe and Asia?
Yes, that's a very good question. Um, I'm going to go beyond, you know, Japan and China and look at the public transportation system in almost any urban system in the world. And their public transportation system, especially when it comes to places like Eastern Europe, Western Europe, China and Japan, you mentioned, the public transportation system, by any measure, is more successful than public transportation systems in the United States. Tokyo, for instance, it boasts an incredibly efficient and punctual rail system with diverse lines connecting to buses and monorails, making it the fastest and cheapest way to travel for most residents and visitors in Tokyo. There are potential costs, but what makes Japan different is that they are profit driven. I mean, they do price elastic analysis, and they really do charge the riders at the highest fare that they can without losing ridership. They do have incentive programs. I mean, you were in Japan, so SUICA cards, you know, the SUICA card for flexible use across different lines. So that gives people some discounts. They are highly integrated in Japan. And a lot of folks who do use public transit in Japan and Tokyo, they feel like it's money well spent. So that's the difference. And yeah, they're going to stay there. They have a huge budget for research. Now, China has been investing in not just urban public transit, but also high-speed intercity travel. They are probably a leading nation in terms of intercity rail transportation. And
Yeah.
then we go to Berlin. Berlin public transit is known for its efficiency and integration, allowing easy navigation across city. So strong public transit culture and high demand, it helps those cities and those countries to be relatively successful. I mean, they still receive a lot of subsidies from the government, but compared to other public transportation agencies, they are a lot more successful. In the United States, what we did and what we had, and you know, a majority of people they support that. Uh, Auto manufacturing companies like giants, multinational corporations like Ford, GM, they weren't just manufacturing autos for the world. They were a very important aspect of our economy, the US economy. As a result, the more cars they sold, the stronger the economy. And so that was always, they were always related and correlated. So this love for our cars and the freedom to drive our cars uh, whenever, wherever, uh, it has made the car culture a lot stronger in the United States than any of those countries that you mentioned. So, um, are we going to be able to change the culture? I don't think so. Changing cultures is very difficult. Uh, the only time that we noticed an increase in the ridership of public transit was, I think it was in mid 2013, 2014, when the gas prices started skyrocketing. And for the first time, all the data that I was getting from different public transit agency, they showed an increase in the ridership. But other than that, it's very difficult, next to impossible, to change the culture. You know, we have our freedom, we have our cars, and that's really an integrated part of our culture. And it's going to be there, I think, for the foreseeable future.
We are starting to get Q&A questions submitted, so I'd just like to remind all the attendees that they can do so using the Q&A function on Zoom, and I will incorporate those towards the end of the discussion. Artie, now that we have kind of established the basic patterns of American urbanization and situated them in space and time, I want to sort of change course a little bit and start talking about your thoughts on specific modes that are very relevant in urban environments beyond transit, and then kind of just get into a grab bag of your sort of research program over the years. And to begin, I want to talk a little bit about bus rapid transit. So given the fact that America has this car culture and the particular urban development paradigms that we've been discussing, is bus rapid transit kind of an underrated option, or at least more viable than the alternatives in most urban centers, particularly the sunbelt?
Again, another excellent question. So bus rapid transit, let's see what makes a transit bus rapid transit. First of all, we need to have dedicated lanes and busways. So these types of buses, they operate in their own lanes, bypassing traffic congestion and improving speed and reliability. That's what it's supposed to be. Bus rapid transit is supposed to have traffic signal priority. So intelligent systems give these buses green lights at intersections, reducing wait times and increasing speed. They are supposed to be equipped with off-board fare collection systems, where passengers pay for their fare before boarding. That speeds up the boarding process. We are supposed to have platform-level boarding and enhanced stations, frequent services, and limited stops, and branding and identity. So distinctive logos, vehicle styling, marketing help to create recognizable identity to the bus rapid transit system. Faster and more reliable service, improved passenger experience, increased capacity, cost-effective alternative to rail, and supporting urban development. So the problem is that bus rapid transit may be underrated in some urban areas in the US because what urban planners refer to as the psychological rail factor and political difficulty in removing the road space despite their cost effectiveness and proven economic environment and quality of life benefits. So this psychological rail factor, most people think that because they are sitting in a rail transit system, they don't see any traffic, rails go from station to station. They think by far rail is more efficient and it's faster, which may not be true. So I know that some bus rapid transit plans have not exactly come to fruition. I believe Baltimore, city of Baltimore is one of them, or at least it has not been as successful as the planners first thought it would be. And a lot of problems that we have for achieving a truly bus rapid transit is, first of all, dedicated lanes. Dedicated lanes and having dedicated lanes, it's a challenge. Cost effectiveness. So if we could do bus rapid transit and people think that their money is worth spending on bus rapid transit and fare collection improves, then that's another variable for success. Environmental benefits are quite a few for bus rapid transit. And it's been, interestingly, in the United States, there's been mixed results in larger urban areas, but mid-sized cities like Eugene, Oregon, Cleveland, Ohio, and Albuquerque, New Mexico, they have had a lot more success with bus rapid transit than larger urban areas. So have they been completely successful? No. Are they underrated? Yes, they are underrated. Again, because of the psychological issues, because of cost issues, and just comes down to people accepting this mode of public transit.
Absolutely. The political institutional variables are incredibly relevant, especially when it comes to these large scale planning projects. We see that here in Baltimore, where I'm sitting right now,
Yes.
very much in the mix when they were talking about the somewhat controversial red line development plan, for example. Sticking in Baltimore, another thing I have been seeing a lot is just this explosion in e-bicycle sales. I see e-bicycle sales booming at my local shops. I see them on the streets all the time. They're becoming incredibly relevant. And I don't think it's just because of their importance to addressing the last mile problem. I think in cities like Baltimore that have more limited transit systems, they're seen as a much more viable option than cars, one, because of cost, but also just because of things like parking and practical everyday needs, especially for those 1 to 2 mile trips. So I'm kind of curious about your overall thoughts on micromobility, whether that's personal micromobility systems, bikes and scooters and the like, or these sort of these companies like Spin, who are deploying entire fleets of electric bicycles and scooters. Do you agree that they seem to be filling a necessary gap here? And if so, should local transportation authorities perhaps be subsidizing these systems more aggressively or building partnerships with these companies who deploy these fleets?
Absolutely. All the above. Now, micromobility has the component of people liking them. They are smaller, they are cheaper, they are more efficient, and they're clean. Most of them are clean. Now, when we talk about micro modes, e-bicycles is just one of the modes in this category. We have scooters, we have skates of different sizes, and we see them all over the place. Now, the major problem for micromodes is that even now, as we speak, there is no consistent policy and regulation for where they should be and how they should be operated. Now, some urban areas and some towns, they've started to develop regulations and laws for these types of modes, but they are few and far in between. Federal government and Federal Highway Administration does have a dedicated webpage to micromodes, but we are still far away from establishing laws, regulations, and policy related to this particular mode. And unfortunately, what happens when you don't have specific policies and regulations is that it impacts safety. And we have had some serious safety issues with these types of modes. Now, are they going to increase? I believe they are. Yes, I believe they are. They are very attractive, not just to people, but as you said, public transportation companies are taking a very, very serious look at this mode. Logistics companies like Amazon, UPS, Federal Express, they are looking at this mode because of the first mile, last mile problem that you mentioned. So one of the major issues, for instance, with public transportation companies is both the first mile and the last mile. I mean, people from their homes getting to the station. A large majority of people avoid taking public transportation of different types because they are not within walking distance. Or if they are within the walking distance, it's not safe or secure. So that's the first mile. The last mile is the same. Once they leave the public transportation system, how far is it from their home to get to their home? Now, when it comes to these logistical companies, the last mile, believe it or not, I've seen statistics that says because of the challenges that these logistics companies face, the last mile sometimes accounts for 50% of the overall shipping cost. They have to, deal with traffic. They have to deal with congestion. They have to deal with inclement weather. Sometimes they have to make sure that the recipient of the cargo is there for signature. So 50%. So that's big. And they are having a serious look at these micromodes of larger size, not the single, size micromodes that we see, but larger size. And trying them, they've already started trying them, and they've had some success with, the different micromodes. And I see that this mode will increase, and we will have policies, regulations, and laws, just like we have for pedestrians, for bicycles, and for cars. So yes, I see an increase in the micromodes for sure.
You've had some interesting research on the impact of these development patterns on the human body and public health more broadly. These issues seem to present kind of a hidden cost to our transportation development paradigm that aren't actively considered by transportation planners and the like. Can you talk a little bit about that? It seems to me rather related to this idea of micromobility presenting a potential alternative.
Absolutely. So, Joe, you remember in the first question you asked was the urbanization, and I referred back to the suburbanization phenomena and our car culture, auto-centered culture. Uh, yes, when you have urban sprawl, when you have suburbanization, that creates long distances between homes, work, and amenities, and it increases reliance on cars. So what happened is that this led to less walking and cycling and contributing to physical inactivity, obesity, and associated chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and everything else. Pollution and environmental exposure, of course, was high density, vehicle dependent areas resulted in increased air pollutants from motor vehicles, respiratory disease, cardiovascular problems, and everything else. Now, what we are witnessing, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention to you is that a lot of these smaller urban areas that we refer to as suburbs, they had their own social demographic shift from urban areas. But now what we see is that a lot of them are now urban areas with a lot of new migration and their own amenities. So traditional suburbs now, a lot of them are new urban areas. And what we are seeing in these new urban areas is a phenomenon called urban heat islands. And these urban heat islands are basically spaces where the temperature is larger than the surrounding vicinity, and that can worsen the air quality and impact public health, particularly in areas with less green space. So physical issues is definitely one of them, but also mental health factors like noise pollution, social isolation due to sprawl, and limited access to green spaces has impacted mental well-being. So the new urbanism emphasizes increased physical activity, well-designed neighborhoods with walkable streets, mixed-use zoning, and accessible public transport encourage active commuting, walking, cycling, and access to parks and recreational facilities are ideal for the new urbanism movement. I'm sure you've heard the term complete street and complete communities. So these two terms, complete streets and complete communities, the main purpose of these urban planning concepts is to get away from auto-centered streets and communities and have a multimodal street and communities that incorporates not just autos, but also public transit, bicycles, walking, and of course, these days, micromodes. So the new urbanism and similar approaches are supposed to foster social connections also, which are crucial for emotional support and overall well-being. We actually did research. I mean, if you want me to bring up a very interesting result, we really found out that communities that, I mean, a lot of different factors, and that's the sort of backlash that I was getting for my research is that human health really depends on a lot of different factors. Do you smoke? Do you not smoke? Do you eat a lot of fried food? I mean, even too much coffee can affect your heart. But
don't tell me
that. For the most part, yeah, I know. For the most part, if you are close, if your community is close to active transportation facilities, that community tends to be healthier. If you build it, they use it. And so it's important. Urban planning, transportation planning definitely impacts not just the physical health, but also the mental health.
I wanted to ask you about your extensive use of GIS, an area that you're kind of renowned for using in the transportation field. So, just on a broad level, why has this tool proved so useful in your studies beyond the fact that it's spatial?
Yeah, GIS is extremely important. I tell you from a research standpoint and from a pedagogical standpoint. Right now at the University of Delaware, all of our graduate students who are seeking an advanced degree, whether they are going for their master's or a PhD, they must take a GIS course. It's that important. And in my research, I can't recall a research project that I've conducted in the last 15, 20 years for which I didn't use geographic information systems. That important. I mean, the smarter project that I'm doing for our center, for our University Transportation Center, is a good example of that. At the same time, I have a state of Delaware supported safety project, and we use the Highway Safety Manual, the Federal Highway Safety Manual. We use GIS extensively. In fact, all of our analysis are based on GIS. GIS is a strong tool. It is a tool that retrieves, saves, analyzes, and demonstrates spatial data, any type of spatial data related to a point, to a line, or to a region. So with that, you can do unlimited amount of analysis with that tool. For instance, in transportation, we've done a lot of route planning and optimization because GIS helps find efficient routes for various transportation needs, from public transit to logistics, hazardous cargo, considering factors like distance, travel time, current traffic, and vehicle-specific constraints. Every single one of those variables that I said, we can save them within what they call different layers of GIS and use them for different purposes. So route planning and optimization is one of them, traffic analysis and management, infrastructure planning and maintenance, public transportation, data management, improved decision-making, and as I said, safety analysis for different types of transportation projects. So it's extremely versatile. It is really, I can't think of any future research project that we are not going to have a need for GIS. The display, we can have not just statistical displays, but also dynamic displays of different parameters, different factors, different results of our analysis that are pleasing to the eye and different colors. They are a wonderful tool for when we have civic group meetings, when we are dealing with different transportation projects and we have to present it to the public. So the display of the results and the results of the analysis are wonderful in a GIS platform.
Absolutely. I mean, if, you know, the way I understand transportation is essentially, it's space-time compression, which is a fancy way of saying you get from A to B quickly and efficiently. You could walk somewhere in 20 minutes, or you could ride a car there in two. And so the relationship between that fundamental attribute of the discipline and mapping is straightforward, but it's also underappreciated. And so, based on that line of thinking, you mentioned your Smarter project a little bit. Why don't you unpack that a little bit and perhaps how you were applying GIS tools in your project, which in this case was on coastal flooding and other issues affecting micromobility in urban spaces.
Exactly. So the premise of our Smarter project for the first 2 years was that we have a lot of literature and a lot of references in terms of how coastal issues like coastal flooding, flooding in general, temperature, and other environmental issues are impacting our roadway system, our vehicle roadway system. What we didn't have at the time was how these factors like coastal flooding, general flooding like flash flooding, temperatures, and really the results of urbanism are impacting our active transportation facilities, like bicycle facilities or walking facilities, and now, of course, the micromodal facilities. So that's what we were after. And we received tremendous amount of help from our state agencies, mostly our Delaware environmental state agency, our Delaware Department of Transportation. And we could conduct different scenarios and determine how coastal flooding and general flooding, urban flooding, high temperature, and this shift to more urban population impacts our active transportation systems, our walking facilities, our bicycle facilities, and our micromodal facilities. So I don't know how we would have done it without GIS, because in one layer, we had the exact map of the location of these active transportation facilities. And in another layer, we had the different scenarios for coastal flooding, for severe flooding and storms, for temperature changes and shifts, and some of the environmental impacts of urbanism, which I'll mention in a little bit. And when you overlap those two layers together in really a few seconds, that does all your analysis for you, because now you can see how different types of coastal floodings impact your walking facilities, your trails, your bicycle paths, your bicycle trails, and it's right there in front of you. So our state agencies, our Delaware Department of Environment, helped us with the most realistic scenarios, not just for the future, but also what they faced in the last 10 years, what they faced in the last 10 years. So when you overlap those different scenarios with your existing active transportation facilities, you can see how they are going to be impacted. And our state Department of Transportation can be proactive in terms of prevention of damage and inundation of those different facilities. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that at least in the United States and probably in other countries around the world, this demographic shift to urban areas are mostly younger people. And yes, there are a lot of gyms and like physical activity facilities popping up all over our urban areas, but they still demand bicycle paths, walking trails, and natural active transportation facilities. So what this research does, it says how the environment and the urbanization itself will impact these facilities, how it's already impacted, and how it'll impact them in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So we can be proactive in taking action and saving these facilities. Now, one thing I didn't mention is the environmental impacts of urbanism. When you have more people and more density of population in a square mile or in an urban area, because you're going to have more cars, you're going to have more buses, and you're going to have more vehicles, you are going to have a non-permeable ground. The ground becomes more compact. And that's going to affect the surface runoff. So when we have rain, it doesn't penetrate because our surfaces become non-permeable. And that has been one of the main causes of urban flooding and what we refer to as flash flooding. And so our job was how those phenomena impact our active transportation facilities. Not so much the roads that the vehicles and the buses ride on, because there's tons of research. What we did was something that had very, very little literature, and that was the impact of these different environmental phenomena on active transportation facilities. Now, I must admit, our research for active transportation, for micromodes, that was the weak link. Because when we started this research 2.5 years ago, there was practically nothing on the policy, regulation, even the numbers. We had some accident data, but we didn't know, we couldn't collect data in terms of their volume, the frequency of use, where, how. So that was challenging. We are getting a lot more information, and we are going to include that in our final report. But we have a perfect overlay of these environmental impacts and our active transportation maps to be proactive in terms of damage control. So that's basically what we did. And I just don't see how we could have done it without GIS.
Artie, I want to finish out with an audience question since we're getting close to the end of our time slot here. And for this, we're going to return to that immediate post-war era because it's such a critical moment in the story that we've been telling over the course of this conversation. So the participant asks, if the US, the UK, and the USSR were in similar positions after World War II, why did we prioritize the car while they continued to support transit and regional rail on top of more modest car development? And if I can help pick this question apart a little bit more, because I think the comparative analysis they're drawing out here is really interesting. the US and the UK have a shared cultural lineage. The UK might not have this sort of frontier spirit, but they come from an Anglo-Protestant background. The USSR, yes, it was much of the country was destroyed, but it also had a lot of land as a major continental power, much like the United States. And they had huge volumes of factories which were producing tanks, which at the time were highly convertible to automobiles. So, how do we make sense of these seeming similarities between the countries here and yet walk away with radically different development outcomes? How do you think about this question?
Exactly. That's an excellent question. So the audience mentioned London and Moscow, probably, or other larger cities within England and Soviet Union at the time. Now, Europe, for the most part, a lot of their urban areas were totally damaged. And they had to pretty much, like London, start basically from scratch. What they did, they decided, they decided on purpose to go back and preserve the public transportation culture of London, which had before the war. And now Moscow wasn't, you know, as badly damaged, but again, that public transportation culture was preserved after the war. What we had in the United States, we had a good economy. You know, before World War II, 1920s and 1930s, there was depression in the United States. But depression was over. Economy was improving big time. And car manufacturing companies, giants like Ford, GM, and other car manufacturing companies, they weren't just producing vehicles. They were an important part of our economy. Now, at the same time, after World War II, and especially in 1950s, the interstate freeway system started and was being completed. The interstate freeway system. So you combine all those different factors in the United States, and I guess human nature comes into play. I have the money, I have the means, I want a larger house. I want to live with my wife and my children. As a result, the concept of nuclear family, and the government supported that. The government supported that. Now, Joe, one other thing that I haven't mentioned yet, and I need to mention now, maybe I should have mentioned it in the beginning of this conversation, is yes, transportation culture is important, but so is the political system under which we live. In the United States, you cannot just wake up one day and have cameras, security cameras, traffic cameras installed all over the place. Why? Because we respect privacy of individuals. We respect the rights of individuals. We can't just wake up one day and have downtown New York charge $50 or $60 for every car that enters that urban area. We can't do that. In other countries, it's a lot easier to implement laws and regulations like that than they are in the United States. And one other thing, just human nature. When you have the means, you want to use it. We had money. Gas was very cheap before the 1973 oil embargo. Interstate highway system. Give me a larger house. Give me land so my children could play. And slowly, this suburbanization phenomena started. Now, the economies of Soviet Union and England post World War II, they were still struggling. I mean, they are recovering from a war, so their priorities were elsewhere. Per capita income was much less than in the United States, and they really didn't have the auto culture that we have in the United States. So, did the government in the United States support suburbanization? Of course, because it helped the economy and it gave people more freedom. So, it's the United States, free country, freedom of choice. And that's how the suburbanization took place and again continued. And even now, the latest statistics shows that at least 40% of all work to home and home to work travels are being done by single occupancy vehicles, just a driver, at least 40% in any metropolitan area in the United States. So different factors come into play. Was the government in the United States and our decision makers supporting public transportation big time, or they wouldn't mind people having their own cars? I think the latter. Because it helped the economy and it served what people wanted in the first place. So,
well, Artie, thank you very much for this extremely holistic conversation about institutions, history, technology, and how it all swirls together to give us the American landscape in our cities that we have today. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will be back next month with Dr. Lev Kazanovich of the University of Pittsburgh. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Artie.
Thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate it. And again, thank you for all your work.